Honorable viewers, I welcome all of you to my YouTube channel, Department of English. Today, I would like to discuss 20th century literary theory. So, especially today, I would like to discuss Russian formalism. So, let's get started. Criticism in Russia in the 19th century was moralistic in nature. Russian formalism officially began in 1919 with the founding of Opposite's group, Petersburg Society for the Study of Poetic Language. Opposites and the Moscow Linguistic Circle were crucial in the rise of Russian formalism. Three periods of formalism: 1916 to 1921, focused on the poetic language and prose composition. 1921 to 1928, attempt to re-examine many literary problems. 1928 to 1935, decline of Russian formalism due to historical and political pressure under Stalin, finals of the movement. Roman Jakobson, Viktor Sklbsky, and Boris Eichenbaum. I'm sorry to say that maybe I can't pronounce the correct names because I'm not Russian. However, the influence of Russian formalism can be seen in structuralism. Russian formalism opposed many theories about literature, like biographical determinism, means the claim that the life of an author determines the type of literature that he produces. They also they also opposed the claim that the only those things which can be felt with the senses and verified are real and worthy in life. That means positivism. Just like the new critics, they did not favor the use of historical, sociological, and other type of knowledge for interpreting literature. They never believed that poetic language was referential in nature and did not entertain subjective readings of works of literature. They were proposed opposers of the symbolist movement. New criticism and Russian formalism were both influenced by the philosophy of Kant and show similarities to the ideas of Corres, who insisted that poetry is organic, that all parts of the poem are connected and dependent and united. Russian formalists believed that literature had nothing to do with life. That means their attempt was to emphasize the notion that literature is self-sufficient. Their subject matter was never literature but literariness, or the quality of being literary. They tried to examine what techniques and devices were present in making everyday language literary. For Jacobson, poeticity is the state of language going beyond the confines of referring to external reality and becoming meaningful within the system with the help of its form. In structuralism and Saussurean concepts, language does not point to external reality. Both the signifier and the signified are psychological concepts. The signifier chair and the concept of chair, which we call the signified, are different from the object chair. This could be the connection between formalism and structuralism. Two important concepts: deformation, changes made to language with the help of poetic devices, and artistic elements which change the form of the language and make it aesthetic. Defamiliarization. According to Russian formalist, literature makes familiar things and happenings appear new and interesting to us. Scholars and romantics also talked about making ordinary experience look extraordinary through poetry. Therefore, literature helps people to fight the boredom and repetitiveness that they encounter in life and helps them to find beauty in their day-to-day life. Defamiliarization is achieved through the inventive use of language, poetic devices, and techniques. A simple example of poetic device making ordinary language poetic is inversion. Let's see. Ordinary language, simple language. While his hopes were nipped in the bud. Poetry, like nipped in the bud were all his hopes. As the Russian formalist believed that poetic devices and techniques rendered literariness to literary works, they did not give much importance to poets or poetic genius. By mastering these techniques and methods, anyone could create literature. Thus, if one person did not write, someone could eventually write it. Thus, for formalists like Victor Skalski, the work was the sum total of its artistic devices and the study of these devices. Thus, the form is more important than the content. The content gives pleasure only because of the form that it is given. Art is a way of experiencing the artfulness of an object. The object is not important. Art as technique. Victor Skalski. Theory on prose. Fabula and syuzhet. Fabula says that the story as it is in the chronological order. Syuzhet said that the order in which the story is presented in the work of the literature, commonly known as plot. The syuzhet makes the fabula interesting and fills the reader with curiosity to know what happens next. In aspects of the novel, M. Foster explains that plot explains how one incident leads to another. In prose fiction, syuzhet defamiliarizes the story for the reader. The concept of fabula and syuzhet are very familiar in the field of narratology and fictional poetics. In order to make the story interesting, the author uses the techniques like selection, concealment, that means certain aspects are not revealed to the reader, facilization, distancing, and talking of different points of view. Winnie C. Booth and Zvetan Todorov are two major critics who analyzed prose fiction. Russian formalists were more interested in poetry and they believed that aspects like rhythm, rhyme, and meter converted ordinary language into poetic language. They called these methods deviations. Deviations from the normal use of language. Even in the case of Greek dramas and plays of Shakespeare, the focus was on presentation rather than originality in the story. It was a noble treatment that they gave already existing stories that made them great writers. Roman Jacobson insisted that the efforts to know the historical background of a work is totally unnecessary. Russian formalists believed that images in poetry was not a good enough technique. It was too direct. Images showed the reader exactly what the author wants them to see. Therefore, it was advisable to use more complex techniques to create a novelty to the presentation of the subject matter. The concept of retardation. Retardation means the prolongation of the process of perception. If the reader is not given direct access to the content of the work of literature, he will be all the more interested to know it. Hence, the process of knowing what is in the poem or work of art has to be prolonged. Rennie Wilkes' criticism on Russian formalism. Wilkes says that Russian formalism is too technical and scientific and does not give enough importance to the human element in literature. If the Russian formalists believe that certain techniques can bring about nobility in presentation, then with repeated use those methods will become familiar to the reader and the novelty will be eventually lost. Thus it is nonsensical to insist on novelty for long. They presented art as something that can be created by adhering to certain forms. They did not give any importance to the author and focused only on the conventions of literature. Poetry is reduced to the status of a puzzle where the reader is trying to find out what the author has hidden in the text. Julia Kristeva says that Russian formalism is too mechanical in its methods. It does not give enough importance to creativity, which is vital to literature. They claimed that by following certain linguistic and literary techniques, literariness can be created. Kristeva believed that each individual text had its own importance in the history of literature. Later schools of criticism discarded Russian formalism as it did not look at the social connection of literature and laid too much stress on the language part of literature. So, my dear viewers, that's all about Russian formalism. For the time being, thanks for your patience sharing.